Alrighty, welcome everyone to the Comic Book Report. My name is Dominic, and we are here with the great Ed Brisson. Ed, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me, man. How are you doing?
And thank you again to all the people at Dynamite that helped coordinate this. Just have a couple questions for you this morning, and I don't think I'm going to bury the lead. One of the reasons we're talking today is to help promote Thundercats Apex. There we go. So what can you tell me about this project?
So Apex is it's a new character to the Thunderverse, as I guess they're calling it. He was introduced in Thundercats number 8, and there's sort of this air of mystery about him. You know, he's fully cloaked. We don't see his face. We don't know who this person is, but clearly he has some sort of history with the Thundercats. He's hunting. I almost gave away a big spoiler there. He's here. He's looking for something. He's super driven for it. In Thundercats 8, it's not really clear what he's after, why he's after it, or what his history is with the Thundercats. And what we're doing in this one shot is sort of pulling the cover back on some of those things and really sort of feeling out who that character is, what his relationship is with the Thundercats, and what it is that he's after and why he's after it. So we kind of give him all that juicy stuff, because this is a character who's going to be playing a big role in the Thundercats universe for the next year or so. So yeah, this is just a cool issue to sort of really introduce him, flesh him out, and really show what this guy is about.
I love that. No, I appreciate that really very much. And I think this one shot, if I'm not mistaken, comes out December. Is that correct?
Oh, Lord. Yes, I believe it's in December. Don't ask me the date, please. But sometime in December.
Awesome. Well, it's coming out for those interested. If I can ask, how did you get involved? How did you get tasked to jump on for this one?
I wish there was like a really exciting story about it, but there's really not. Nate had hit me up to see if I'd be interested in writing the character. I've known Declan for a long time, like a decade plus.
Oh, wow.
And when he started on Thundercats, I started pestering him pretty much right away about when is Dynamite going to do Silverhawks, and so like he knew that I was interested in that sort of universe. Nate I'd worked with in the past. I did a Kickstarter during the pandemic for a crime book, and Nate came on and helped me with that. So we had a relationship already. He sort of reached out, thought that some of the stuff I've done in the past would really kind of the Apex kind of was like in my wheelhouse of the kind of stuff I typically enjoy writing. And so he just reached out, asked me if I was interested in it, pitched me sort of the idea. I was definitely interested. I grew up with Thundercats, and so that was it was kind of an easy yes, especially with the way that he pitched it to me, how they were approaching this character, how they were approaching the book. Right. It was something that it's very much in my wheelhouse, very much the kind of story that I'm interested in telling.
I love that.
Yeah, cool. So nothing too exciting, but there you have it.
It's still cool though that they tagged someone who's passionate about this character, who grew up, like you said, with Thundercats. Like you're interested in the general kind of IP in this playground. So I love that. I think they got the right guy for the job.
Here's hoping.
I know you just mentioned Silverhawks, and I know Dynamite is supposed to be coming out with a Silverhawks book, I think in January.
Again, that's right, end of January. Yeah.
Is there anything you can share and speak of for that? I know that that's another piece of IP from, I think, another 80s cartoon, if I'm not mistaken. I'm a little with Silverhawks.
That's okay. Silverhawks was like a sister show to the Thundercats back in the 80s. So it's another Rankin Bass show. It was kind of 3 in this series of like adventure, or so it's the second in the series of sort of adventure type shows that they launched in the mid 80s. There was Thundercats first, and there was Silverhawks, and they did another show called Tiger Cats that came after it. For me, Silverhawks was it. It was like I love Thundercats, but Silverhawks was my jam growing up. And so what, like I already sort of mentioned earlier, when they got the license to do Thundercats, I was like pestering Declan. I'm like, when are they going to do Silverhawks? And when Nate called me actually to offer me Apex,
yeah,
like in the middle of the call, I was like, when are you guys going to do Silverhawks? And at that point, they had no plans.
yeah.
And Nate called me 2 or 3 days later. It was like pretty
abrupt.
quickly after. And
Yeah.
he was like, did you want to write Silverhawks? I'm like, yes, like, absolutely. I want to write Silverhawks. And
Awesome.
he, you know, I believe they kind of had been talking about it, but I was like, I was in there pretty early staking my claim on it. I was, you know, expressing my interest. But yeah, it's a book. You know, it's a cartoon I grew up. I loved. I had a lot of the toys. The thing I like about it, and the thing we're leaning into with our approach, is that Monstar, the main baddie in this series, he's basically a galactic mobster, right? He's a galactic kind of Godfather type character.
Yeah.
He's still got that like kind of 80s crazy, you know, he's got 2 different modes that he transforms into. So he's badass and then becomes even more badass.
Right.
But I was always drawn to the idea that more or less, you know, like rather than just being like a bad dude for, you know, wanting to take over planets, he's just running a crime cartel across the galaxy. Yeah. So we're kind of approaching this as a almost like an Untouchables in space. Is kind of our approach.
Well, you hit a couple very much for me there.
But it's kind of what the promise of the show was back in the day. And one of the things that was sort of I think one of the things they didn't do really in the show is like we got a sense of who the characters were, but really never got too much into their background and too much into their backstory. And so that's something that we're hoping to really play into with this series. Like the series starts before the Starhawks are actually formed, so it's kind of
cool
how the team comes together over the first 3-4 issues, and what the sort of history, because there's a character named Stargazer in the original cartoon who we know has this history with Monstar. You know, they battled hundreds of years ago. He was the one who put him in prison. And so it sort of starts with him, and then we kind of build the team over the, you know, like I said, the first few issues, and take some time to really get into the backstories of who these characters are and really kind of show, like I said, show who they are and really give some sense of like depth to the characters that was maybe missing at times in the cartoon.
I love that. And for someone like me who I enjoyed the Thundercats, it was on for me, you know, when I was growing up as well, I think on reruns, but I missed out on Silverhawks. But it sounds like this will be accessible to new fans as well, kind of set before the series a bit. So that'll be good.
That's the hope. Yeah.
I love that. Cool. Well, if we can, I'm really excited about that. If you're interested in Thundercats Apex, check it out in December, and Silverhawks in January. If I can, Ed, I'd like to kind of zoom back a little bit here. I know, like, especially researching you this week leading into our interview, you know, I'm familiar with your name. I've seen you build on some comics I've liked over the years, but I was pretty taken aback by just your breadth of your bibliography. I mean, I feel like you've kind of had your finger on everything. So many different publishers, so many different properties. And I guess one of the questions I have is, how did you first get involved in the industry in general? Were you a comics fan growing up, or how did you kind of make your way into this space?
Yeah, so the like 10-cent tour version of it is that I initially wanted to be a comic book artist.
Okay.
I didn't have much interest in being a writer. So after high school, I went through fine arts. You know, I was kind of like honing my skill. I started self-publishing work, and I only started writing because where I lived at the time, I didn't know. There was like one other guy locally who wanted to be a writer, but he was kind of I don't know, like a difficult personality and also not a terribly great writer. So like I knew that I could just write stuff on my own and do as well. And so I for years, like we're about 18 years, 16 to 18 years, I wrote and drew and colored and lettered all my own work. Like, and I would do zines, like photocopied mini comics, sell them at like the local comic shops or record shops or wherever. And And the whole time I was trying to sort of break into the industry in one way or another, and just didn't have a lot of luck. And then after 16 years of doing that, I one day realized that like over the 16 years of doing this, of writing scripts for myself and learning how to write by, I would, when I was in college, I would take writing courses.
Right.
At the time, like screenwriting was the closest you get. I would take short story, novel, and screenwriting courses. There were no comic courses available back then.
Sure. Yeah.
Just to sort of improve my writing skills. And at some point, the writing kind of took over. I realized that I actually really enjoyed the writing, and I started to really not enjoy drawing. Like I would get really frustrated every time I'd sat behind a drawing board.
Sure.
So there was a point in 2010 where I just stopped drawing. Like on my birthday in 2010, I literally pencils down and stopped drawing and just focus on my writing. And I started doing a series called Murder Book, which is a bunch of short crime stories.
Right.
With friends of mine who were artists, and I just self-published for a couple of years, put those out. I had this, I'd stopped pitching books and just self-published my own stuff. And it, and then I sort of started to build back up and working with artists and pitching. So, I worked with Michael Walsh. We pitched a book to Image that got picked up in 2012 called Comeback, which I think was our second or third pitch to Image. Like we were pitching at them pretty hard trying to get in.
Right.
And then from there, it was just kind of like, opportunities just started springing up after Comeback, because Comeback came out pretty well. I did another book called Sheltered right afterwards with Johnny Christmas, which did well. And so it sort of snowballed slowly. I had, I think my first Marvel gig was back in 2013. I did a couple of fill-in issues on Secret Avengers.
Right.
That it was a learning experience. I don't think those are great issues. It was a real learning experience for me.
Sure.
I didn't work again for Marvel until 2015. I did a short, and then in 2016 is when sort of things really started to come together for me at Marvel. So I worked at Marvel pretty steadily for about 4 or 5 years, and then obviously in the course of that, I worked for DC for a little while. I've done plenty of things at Boom. I've done I've done a few things at IDW. Dark Horse eventually collected and released Murder Book, those short stories that I had done. We had I think there's nearly 200 pages by the time I was done, because I kept doing a bunch of 5, 10 to 20 page stories, and they collected that. So yeah, I've kind of been bouncing around, just working on whatever sort of interests me. I am kind of I flit about quite a bit, but it's good. I like it. It keeps things interesting.
Awesome. Well, this just leads me to a couple other questions, if you don't mind. I always think it's fascinating to talk to people that have kind of done double duty, right? Between, illustrating and writing, and I know you've transitioned, like you mentioned, to just writing. That's how I kind of identify you mentally myself as a fan. But I guess for me, my question is, since you started from that art background, do you ever find yourself do you think about these stories visually first before you kind of get the scripting done, or is that not really in your process? I'm curious, kind of coming from the art background first, how much that influences your creative process still, even if you are just writing on things now.
So I think it's a bit of both. Like, I think a lot of it is there's a lot of thought of the character and who they are and what they want and what the world looks like and that sort of stuff.
Sure.
But when I am sitting down to write a script, I'm definitely thinking visually for like how the pages are set. I do, though, I like to be as collaborative as possible. That's the thing I love about comics, is the collaborative process of it. So I try not to. I'm not a writer. I do write full script, but I'm always open to how an artist could come in and interpret the script, and I can go back and work around them normally. As long as we're getting everything in there that we need. But I do think it gives me the ability to sometimes speak the same language, to understand what it is I'm asking of an artist, or if I need something specifically, kind of how to ask for it. Every so often, if I, there's a few times where I've written action pages that are whatever, a double page spread of action when we've a ton of stuff going on. I'll
Right.
sometimes sit down and I'll thumbnail it out, like really roughly thumbnail it out, just to
Yeah.
include with the script so the artist kind of knows what I'm talking about. Because sometimes when you have a lot of really quick action, things can get kind of lost, and it's
Sure.
easier to just have that the sketch. But yeah, I think I tend to start with like character,
Mhm.
situation, that sort of stuff, and then the visual stuff for me comes a little bit after.
Right on. Okay, well that's cool to know. Like I said, people that kind of have worked in both areas, I always like hearing kind of what goes into their head and their process, where applicable. But another question I had, you mentioned that you've kind of dabbled in so many different publishers, between a lot of self-published, between some of the indie publishers, and then some from the big two, being Marvel and DC. I guess for me, do you find yourself? Let me think of how to phrase this. Do you personally have a preference as a writer working with kind of established IP versus your own completely own created characters, if that makes sense? And I know sometimes you get to create characters within the IP,
Mhm.
but you find yourself leaning one way or another. Like I know some creators seem to like adapting, like mainstay characters like Batman, Spider-Man, things like that. And others are just like, I'm ready to do creator owned, my own creations my entire life. Like where do you land? Where do you land in that spectrum as someone who jumps around a lot?
So this sounds like a cop out answer, and so I apologize, but I
No, I'm
really
ready. I'm
like
ready
it.
for it.
I like, I like doing both things. I like, but I like to have a mix of it. I don't like to be doing like strictly work for hire
Yeah.
without doing any creator owned. I find that I get really antsy when I'm doing that, and I did that for a few years,
Yeah.
um, just because time wise, I was writing so many books that I couldn't do my creator owned stuff. It just didn't like I just couldn't carve out the time,
Right.
and so I found that I was getting really frustrated when I
Yeah.
was doing that, and not like it was like I wasn't fully satisfied, right? Like
Right.
uh, I was just constantly always thinking about that. So as much as possible, I'd like to have like a healthy balance between the two. There's still like a bunch of big two books or characters that I haven't written that I would love to write
Yeah.
still. But then now I've got this like backlog of ideas that I want to make it through because I hadn't been able to do creator own work for such a long time, and I don't think I realized during that period where I was only doing work for hire how badly I missed creator owned until like the pandemic hit, and then everything was
Right.
like pencils down.
Yeah.
And I did. I went back to doing more murder book stories, but for the first time, I did a like what's the long? It's like a 60 some odd page murder book story that we released as like kind of a 72 page hardcover. Uh,
Whoa.
and that was the thing that like that was my first chance to kind of get back to really do creator own for a few years after a few years of not doing it.
Yeah.
And it really uh, it felt good. It felt like very comforting. It felt like going home again,
Yeah.
and it felt kind of like where I belonged.
Yeah.
Uh, so since that happened, I've been trying really hard to maintain this sort of balance between the two. Like
Love that.
it's that sort of I can't remember if it's John Cassavetes who's like was like one for them, one for me kind of
Yeah.
thing, and that's my approach, right? Like
Yeah. Very cool. So with that, I'd like to, well, one, I just think that's great, and I think it makes sense looking at your body of work because I do see kind of those patterns of, hey, creator owned and big two stuff. And, it's kind of great. I'm a fan of both as well, just as a comic book reader. I guess the question I have, because I have seen you in a lot of properties at the big two, so this is a two-part question, if you don't mind.
okay,
The first one is, in the big two, Marvel or DC, what have been some of your favorite characters to work on? And then what are some characters that are on that list for you of, hey, I haven't worked on this character yet in the big two, and this is like a dream character I'd love an opportunity to take a crack at?
so I think like I really my first series at Marvel was a mini for Bullseye that I loved writing
Yeah.
because the character is just kind of such a prick and so for himself, and it's like very cathartic to write.
Yeah.
Logan, I wrote Old Man Logan and the Dead Man Logan for I guess almost 3 years,
Wow.
and I really loved writing Logan. I have a Punisher mini that I wrote that I don't know if it'll ever see the light of day because of
Whoa.
the pandemic and stuff.
Yeah.
That still I hope gets out there. I really liked, over at DC, I wrote Batman Incorporated. I really loved writing for like Ghostmaker because again,
Yeah.
he's a very Bullseye-like character in a
Yeah.
lot of ways. But at Marvel, Glob Herman is like a character I love, and I pour a lot of myself into that character.
Yeah.
In terms of characters I haven't written, obviously, I think every writer will probably tell you Daredevil, and that's the same
Oh
for
yeah.
me.
He's my
Um,
favorite. Gotta go with Daredevil.
but my maybe not surprising to anyone who's listened to me talk before, but Speedball is a character that I really love
Wow.
and would really, really love to do a miniseries. I came very close. A couple of years ago, I have a Speedball pitch for like a
Yeah.
5-issue kind of Speedball book I want to do. Came very, very close to getting it through, but it ultimately did not make it past the sales department. But
Wow.
that's a character I would still really like to do, and I think over at DC, it's similar-ish. Booster Gold
Okay.
or Blue Beetle, and
Yeah.
weirdly not together though. I'd like to do them individually, not. I know that they're generally as a team,
Right.
but for me, there's some really interesting stories to be told individually about those characters. Not that there isn't together, but like
Yeah.
and like for me, generally, if I'm gonna be on like a big two book, my preference is like solo characters.
Yeah.
I don't get to do it often. For some reason, I always end up on team books, but the solo books are the stuff I really really love doing when I had the opportunity.
Very cool. Do you find that you like writing solo character books over team books just because it helps you drill deeper with that singular character? Or I guess what is the appeal for you writing a solo character versus a team
I
book?
think I think that's a large part of it. Like
Mhm.
you get to spend more time with one character. With a team book, there's always a balancing act of like
Right.
making sure everyone's got their enough space to that they can have their moments and you can still satisfy the story. And it's really like a pretty tough juggling act. And like anytime you're on a team book, you're always going to get people who are pissed off because their character is not getting as much love as or
Right.
they don't think you're staying true enough to your character, whatever it is. There's always something, or they're mad that the character they love isn't on the team uh,
Sure.
because they were on the team one time back in 1993, and everyone forgets or whatever it is.
Sure. Sure.
Um, but I don't know. They're just more. There's for me. That's just kind of where I gravitate to when I'm reading stuff. I grew up
Yeah.
reading solo titles over
Yeah.
team titles.
Right on. Okay, just a couple more questions for you, and then I'll let you
Yeah.
go. I really appreciate the time again. But a question I like to ask a couple creators that I always think is fun is for someone that's like newer to your work, maybe they're just want to get into the Ed Brisson business right now. What do you think are maybe two or three of your titles that you think is kind of a quintessential or like this is me. This is like I poured myself a lot into this. This is a great like if you want my highlight reel, this is what I'd point you at. Maybe these couple
Right.
titles. Is that a fair question to ask you for those that are watching that
That's
maybe
that's a
want to
fair
tackle
question.
it? Mhm.
And I'm gonna cheat and I'm gonna give like six, but I'm gonna give three
Yes,
creator owned and three work for hire.
let's do it. I
So
like it. Yes.
if you want creator owned, like quintessential Ed Brisson, um, I would point people towards either Sheltered, which is a book I did about doomsday preppers with Johnny Christmas. It's a 15 issue, 3-volume series. The Violent, which is a book I did with Adam Gorham back in 2016. It's a crime book that is largely about the housing crisis in Vancouver, where I was living at the time.
Yeah.
But like the downward sort of pressure that puts on the poor through various machinations. Right, like it's we're seeing now, like in 2016, it was a thing that was like pretty unique to Vancouver, the housing crisis, but now we're seeing it almost everywhere. I believe you guys are in the States as well.
Yeah.
but definitely across Canada, it's a real issue. So the violence, sheltered, and then the third one is if you can get your hands on it. Like I said, Dark Horse collected murder book. So
Right.
it's I think it's 180 pages of short crime stories that range from 5 pages up to about 20 pages.
Yeah.
So that is just me doing crime. I love writing crime fiction.
Yeah.
And there it is. In terms of work for hire, I would say the Bullseye miniseries I mentioned earlier, which was my
Right.
first Marvel work.
Yeah.
The Old Man Logan / Dead Man Logan. It's a big chunk of stuff, but that one, and then I said 3, and now I don't know what the third one is going to be. I don't know. Like it didn't end. It kind of just. Oh, you know what? I'm going to say Predator. I've been on Predator. I've written 3 volumes of Predator for Marvel. I'm a really big fan of that franchise.
Yeah.
I introduced a new character called whose name is Theta, who's like a through line through those books, and she is a predator hunter. So it kind of flips it a bit, where
Wow.
there's someone out there hunting predators versus predators hunting them.
Awesome.
So yeah, those 3 books.
Very cool. Well, there's some on that list I definitely haven't gotten to yet, so I'm even really excited to check them out. I know
Awesome.
particularly that Bullseye miniseries has been on my list for a while because I'm a big Daredevil fan. So I think now that it has your stamp of approval, especially, I'll definitely have to look into that a little bit more. Last question we'll do, and then we'll go ahead and start landing the plane. Well, I guess question leading into a question: are you still a comic book reader? I know, like, I kind of assume that with a lot of creators, but sometimes I find that you're so focused on kind of creating that sometimes people aren't reading as much. Do you still read comic books?
I do read comic books. It is tough because working in the industry, you get to see kind of how the sausage is made, which
For
kind of
sure.
like takes a little bit of the magic out of it
Right.
at times, and you kind of always know what's going on. But yeah, I still absolutely read comics. I just this past week read the new Absolute Batman
Oh,
#1, which I
nice.
thought was incredible, and then the Thomney and Mark Waid Batman and Robin Year 1, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's tougher for me to find the time to do it, especially like right now. I'm doing as many comics as I was like 2 years ago, but I'm also like working in video games during the day,
Wow. Okay.
and so like I'm pulling double duties. Just finding time to sit down and read is has been it's been pretty tough. But yes, I do definitely read comics. I'm at my comic shop once a week picking stuff up. So
Awesome. Okay, I didn't have this question, but now I kind of do. And if you don't want to speak to it, that's totally fine. But video game stuff? Are you a video game writer as well?
as of December of last year, yes, yeah.
Wow.
So it's all new to me.
Okay.
I can't say what I'm working on though.
Okay, no problem. But wow, stay tuned. That's exciting. I know I've heard creators talk about sometimes writing for video games is a little bit different because if you have games that are less than linear, sometimes there's multiple options, multiple scripting options, things like that. But wow, I'll have to stay tuned on that as more is released about that. But I guess
Yeah, I'll keep
congratulations on
everyone.
that.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll keep everyone posted as I know more, but it'll be probably a couple years before I can really say
Right
anything.
on. Okay, and then final question. This is it, and then we're good to go here. Um, as a comic book fan, what do you think are maybe 2 or 3 comic book runs that you feel like everyone should need, or maybe it's a hidden gem that just you love? Doesn't have to be ongoing. It could be a classic. It could be anything. Like what
Right.
is what is something that you're like, oh yeah, you got to read this, or it's meant a lot to
So I
you.
think the books that had the biggest impact on me, um, like these are kind of like almost like low hanging fruit, but
Sure.
Batman Year 1, like
Yep.
massive book, massive influence on me. Craven's Last Hunt was a book that really had a massive
Yeah.
impact on me when I was younger. It was just so much darker than anything I'd seen, and I tend to gravitate towards sort of dark and moody over like bright and happy.
Yeah.
in terms of stories.
Yeah.
And that one, as a kid, it was just like it hit that sweet spot for me. I'd never seen anything like that before.
Yeah.
The ending of that series, literally, I did not think as a kid you could do that in comics.
Yeah. Seriously.
So it messed me up. I read the covers off of it. Like I collected it as it was coming out in single
Oh, wow.
issues
Yeah.
across the 3 series. It was an Amazing, Spectacular, and Web, and I
Yeah.
read the covers right off of those.
Mhm.
And then I think later, 2 other things that were big for me were Sin City when it came out, and Stray Bullets was is
Okay.
another one that I think everyone should read. And lastly, if anyone can get their hands on it, it's very difficult to find.
Mhm.
There is a book called "They Found the Car" by an artist slash writer named GIPI.
Okay.
It's just a 32-page one-shot black and white crime story that Fantagraphics released, I think, in 2006,
Mhm.
and it's been out of print since. So it's difficult to get your
Wow.
hands on. But if
Yeah.
you can get your hands on it, it's, to my mind, one of the most perfect one-shot comics ever released.
Wow. Woo. Okay. Well, you heard it here, everyone. Those are Ed Brisson's go-to recommendations here, at least when I put him on the spot. Ed, thank you so much for your time today. Everyone watching, if you're interested, please check out Thundercats Apex coming out in December, and then Silverhawks going into the new year, I believe, January.
Awesome. Yeah.
Ed, thank you so much for your time. And again, to everyone at Dynamite, thank you for helping coordinate. Really appreciate it. Hope you guys enjoyed.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Alrighty. This has been the Comic Book Report. Thank you everyone for watching today's interview. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and a comment, maybe share it with a friend. Thanks for watching everyone. Have a good one.